and it's great to be here, and thanks for all turning out on a cold night for listen to an old hack from the media, chat away. So I was sort of a bit in your hands, actually, because I wasn't precisely sure what to talk about. I had this idea. I was going to talk about a very serious criminal case that has been in the press, is now on appeal in the Court of Criminal Appeal. It's already had 2 trials, and now we're into the second appeal, and it's a very nasty case. And I just thought I either could talk about that, and then maybe we could pretend to be the jury afterwards and vote on what have I done? Vote on deliver a verdict. Or, if you like, we could talk about contemporary issues in law and politics. But it's up to you. What would you prefer me to do? Oh, it's like doing your school homework. You just do it and you forget it as quickly as possible, and it's one of those weird sort of columns that has a ridiculously early deadline. Its deadline is on Wednesday night for a Saturday paper, so the world's moved on 2 days after you've written it. Anyway, well, maybe I'll do the yes.
What about Peter Dutton becoming the next?
Well, there's a we can talk about that too. I mean, it's a terrifying prospect of what's going on in this country at the moment. There's some truly awful things. Would you like me to go down that path or go down the crime path? Crime?
No, the first.
I can hear crime over here. There's a Okay, we'll do the first one. And we can do it quickly, and then maybe...
We'll do both.
both.
In questions, the Peter
the Dutton
delight,
and all of that.
that can come up in questions, okay?
Access to justice, open justice, Dutton. So, all right. There's a young girl. She's 18. She's never been to the bars of King's Cross before. She comes to Sydney with her friends from the Central Coast for a night out on a Saturday night. They all meet up at McDonald's, which is she's converted a bottle of bourbon into 2 Coke bottles. Bit of pre-fueling. She's mixed it with Coke. She has about 3/4 of one of the 700ml Coke bottles, mixed bourbon and Coke. She goes to the World Bar and has what they call a teapot of cocktails. She goes to the Soho Bar, has a vodka and orange. She goes back to the World Bar, has a vodka and cranberry juice. Then she goes back to the Soho, where she meets the son of the co-owner of the Soho Hotel, which is in, Victoria Street, King's Cross.
The Piccadilly Hotel.
Is it the Piccadilly Hotel? It used to be the Piccadilly, yeah. It is the same one. It's now called the Soho, although it's been sold, and it's going to be, like everything else in life, very expensive apartments. So within minutes, she meets this young guy who's sort of in his 20s, a bit older than her. His name is Luke Lazarus. And quite quickly, they're having quite passionate kissing. And this gets a bit graphic. If you're sort of a bit faint-hearted, maybe this is not a good story. Then he says, well, maybe you'd like to go somewhere private. They're on the dance floor. Her friend is there as well. The other 2 friends have peeled off somewhere else, but she's got a friend also with her, a girlfriend. And he says, well, you'd like to go somewhere private. Okay, we'll go somewhere private. And they go down some stairs at the back of the old Piccadilly Hotel, now the Soho Bar. a door opens and she's suddenly in an alleyway at the back of this pub. And they continue to kiss. It's called aggressive hooking up. And I've never done it, but it's it's big. And then all of a sudden the mood changes a bit. It's not, he says, he becomes a bit impatient and says, "Put your hands against the fence." And she's a bit afraid, she's a bit uncertain about what to do, and a bit, and so she obeys him. She puts her hands against the fence and he attempts to pull down her underwear, which is described in the latest trial judgment as her undies. But I'll just break off for a minute and say that it's taken me 2 months to get hold of the judgment of the district court in the latest trial judgment of this case. And they did everything, the court did everything possible to stop me getting the judgment. I just wanted to have a look at it and do possibly a piece for The Guardian on it. And it's, it took intercessions with the Attorney General and the Justice Department to get hold of this damn thing. But I read it. It's 78 pages long by a judge called Judge Tupman, Robin Tupman, and she's a very experienced criminal judge. But anyway, it's a tortuous affair because it goes to the whole issue of consent and reasonable consent and what is understood by consent. Anyway, she then pulls her underwear back up and says, "I'm worried about my friend, I better go back to my friend." And he says, no, she'll be all right. You stay with me. Oh, it'll be fine down here. This is outside in an alleyway. Anyway, he then says, she's got her hands up on the fence. I may not have the exact order correct, so excuse me if this is not a complete verbatim translation of what happened. But anyway, subsequently he does remove her underwear and attempts to have sex with her. He fails. This is an unsuccessful attempt. And then he says to her, "Get on your hands and knees and arch your back." And she, again, is fearful, concerned and confused and doesn't really know what to do. So she obeys him. She gets on her hands and knees in an alleyway and arches her back. And after unsuccessfully attempting to penetrate her vaginally, he does it anally. So here's an 18-year-old girl who says she is not consenting to this. She doesn't consent. But in his mind, because she has obeyed basically all his instructions and has been kissing, they've been kissing prior to this, she thinks he is consenting. So the ingredients for rape, and he was subsequently charged with rape, the ingredients for rape are penetration, first of all, that's accepted in this case. Consent, that the victim or the complainant must not have consented. And thirdly, that the accused must know she hasn't consented. So there's a disparity here. She hasn't consented, but does he know she hasn't consented? This becomes very difficult, and it's been up to the Court of Appeal once. He was found guilty at the first trial. Court of Appeal said there has to be a new trial because the directions on consent were incorrect. New trial, he was acquitted. Back to the Court of Criminal Appeal again in September for another crack at what constitutes consent, what is reasonable in the mind of an accused, what constitutes a reasonable understanding in the mind of the accused of the consent of a victim. So subsequent to this, what we'll call an attack, he asks her to put her name in his phone, in the notes section of his phone, which she does. And again, she explained in evidence in the court that she did that because she was fearful and wanted to get away and didn't want to make any more fuss. So she put her name in the notes section. Now, there was a vast amount of argument about whether her name was in a list in the notes section or on a blank new page in the notes section of an iPhone. She said it was on a blank page. He said it was in a list. And subsequently, it was forensically proved that her name was put on a list. The accused's lawyers said that by putting her name on a list of other names, and there were about 15 other girls' names in this list, this was a trophy list. And she then changed her complete attitude because she was distressed to know that she was just another victim of this trophy list. So there was sort of quite a bit of contention around this damn list. There was quite a lot of contention around how much she'd drunk, whether she was drunk. She said she was drunk. The judge said, yes, she possibly was substantially intoxicated, but still functioning, still mentally functioning, still able to make up her mind. So it's a very difficult case, and I thought it was a very interesting one when I read the judgment, because, you know, if the law says you've got to have a reasonable belief that the complainant is consenting, and the complainant does what you say and what you want, but she isn't consenting for all sorts of other reasons, her youth, her inexperience and so on, how does the law resolve that? Very hard. And the Crown said in the case that the whole of this experience, the whole of the drink, you know, the fact that she was taken outside into an alleyway for sex, all of that must surely indicate, and she was 18 and a virgin, she'd never had sex before, according to the evidence. This must indicate that she couldn't have been consenting. She certainly couldn't have been consenting to it. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting case about consent and very delicate issues in criminal justice. And, you know, no one can mention her name for legal reasons, obviously, but she did post something on Facebook which was just sort of made me almost cry. It was so terrible that, you know, she said she'd left herself in this alleyway and she'd never really get over it. And
Was this before a jury?
the first trial was before a jury, and that's very interesting, actually. The first trial was for a jury, yes. The second trial, the accused, Luke Lazarus's lawyers applied for a judge alone on the grounds that they had, the jurors would know about the first conviction. So the district court granted a judge alone trial, which was pretty unusual for a serious criminal offence, on the basis of the potential adverse publicity from jurors knowing that there had been a previous conviction. So the jury conviction, judge alone, acquittal. Quite interesting. That's right. There were, but, you know, in a criminal case, that's normal. Everyone rustles up the best references they can get. The Judge Tupman, in the second case, in the second trial said, the references meant that he was a person of good character. Well, it's a very elusive concept, what is a good character. I mean, half the time I don't think I'm a good character, but, Liberal Party Mayor of Waverley, lots of business people, some Greek archbishop or something. It was a powerful list of people. And the other point is that those witnesses, those character witnesses, have had their names suppressed in the second trial because they were subject to such vitriolic outpouring on social media. And there's a lot of hot feelings about this fellow. Anyway, that was my little... I just was fascinated by this case because it was so contentious and had so many sort of weird and unresolved sort of issues about it, and the law just couldn't sort of give any clarity. I mean, it's 2 trials and back to the Court of Criminal Appeal, there's still no clarity.
Richard, can you say what you mean by the law? Because I think from the layperson in the street, it sometimes looks like a lot of chicanery, a theatre of rather privileged actors dressed up. So can you say what is the law?
Yeah, I can. I'll just find something here.
And the microphone, please.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
Did she in any state tell him to stop?
Yes. Well, her evidence was yes. She did tell him to stop. And she repeatedly said, I want to get back to my friend. But the judge, because her version of the sexual encounter was different from his version, and the judge, by a sort of very elaborate process of deduction, worked out, and I won't go into it because it's too horrible, frankly, but worked out that she would prefer the accused version of what happened in the alleyway to the complainant's version. So she dismissed her claim that she had said stop. She said the whole of this, of her, wasn't credible, wasn't realistic. And it was all to do with his failure to, there were DNA swabs, and his failure to penetrate her vaginally initially, and then he penetrated her anally. So she said, I said stop, and I want to get back to my friends repeatedly. There was other evidence, and I don't think she disagreed with it, that she had, pushed back and forward during the sex act, and this was taken to be a sign of consent. I don't know, these are just normal human involuntary actions maybe, but the difficulty in this case is that in her mind throughout, she was not consenting. She did say stop. She did say, I want to get back to my friends. She didn't realise she was going to be in an alleyway having sex. And yet in his mind, she'd done all these things to suggest that she was along for the ride. So there is a provision in the Crimes Act about consent. And of course, in rape cases, you don't have to have necessarily struggled or reacted forcefully to resist the sexual assault in order for there to be, a decision about consent. You don't have to have resisted physically, necessarily. The other thing is that alcohol is not to be taken into account. I think that's right, is not to be taken into account in an assessment of reasonable consent. So, in other words, voluntary consumption of alcohol does not give the accused the right to think that you're consenting. I think that's... I'll find... Wait. I've got to find this. Anyway, I can't find it. But anyway, is that enough on rape? Yeah, okay, we get the picture. What's happened to her? Who's this woman?
Harris, Amber, you spoke about it on Late Night Live. Amber Harris. Channel
Oh, Amber Hammer. Oh, no. Yes.
So, yeah, Chandra, you,
Now, is there anything in the law that says the benefit of the doubt should, the benefit of the doubt? In such cases,
There's no benefit of the doubt.
or that
No, this is a criminal case, so there's no. The standard is beyond reasonable doubt. Yeah. Okay, well, that was all very happy. God, how did we get onto that? It was just my little obsession with how cases run, so I'd be very interested to see how the Court of Criminal Appeal deals with it the next time. So, all right, let's talk about just what's going on in this sort of mad country. There's so many little bits and pieces that just get more and more depressing to me on a regular basis. We've now got Section 44 of the Constitution, which is a new thing, that some very sort of quiet and reserved and rather academic barrister in Perth has discovered that Scott Ludlam is in breach of it, and I think he was researching Tony Abbott and the dual citizenship thing. And I know this barrister is a New Zealander himself. His name's John Cameron, but he's a New Zealander. He's in Perth as a barrister now. And he was actually, I think he was researching Darren Hinch. But Hinch had relinquished his New Zealand citizenship before he was elected to the Senate. And I think Abbott, in order to get his Rhodes Scholarship, had to relinquish his British citizenship, because the Rhodes only applies to Commonwealth people, not British people. So Abbott's in the clear, I think, although no one's seen his bloody renunciation. And he's shown you, has he?
It's on the ABC News.
A letter from the home. Okay. The great thing we all missed was on Monday of this week, the 17th, I think was Monday, 100 years ago, the royal family, George V, middle of World War I, renounced his Germanness. He 100 years ago on Monday, they renounced being Coburg, Saxony, Hesse, and all the titles and stuff that went with that. Germans weren't too popular in 1917 in Britain. And they looked up the phone book and found the most English name they could locate, which was Windsor. And they thought, well, we'll be Windsors. Which is Tony Packard then adopted that and said, up the Windsor Road from Balcombe Hills, let me do it right for you. So this has suddenly become a big issue, this section. No one much paid attention, but there's been four politicians, I think 4 senators this year, that have gone out on the basis of Section 44. And there was another part of it about, and the thing is designed to stop people having conflicts of interest or benefiting from their parliamentary position by selling things to the Commonwealth or the Commonwealth selling things to them. So it's a rather old-fashioned but very strict view that politicians and pecuniary interests are separate. And it got into trouble, I think, back in, maybe it was Fraser's time. There was a Senator Webster, a National Party guy, who had a timber business. And the timber business was selling, must have been Goff's time actually, because the Senate was very tight. The timber company was selling timber products to the Commonwealth in various capacities. So this was a breach of the pecuniary interest provisions of the Constitution, the protections of the public against politicians benefiting from their positions in Parliament. Barwick took this case on his own. He didn't want any of the other judges. He'd not long resigned as a Liberal cabinet minister, became Chief Justice of the High Court, and said, oh no, this is all far too remote, it's only timber, it's a distant thing, he didn't have his hands on the invoices, let him off. And Webster's case had been the guiding principle on this provision of the Constitution ever since, until the Bob Day case this year, when the High Court opened it all up and said, no, this is potentially, it is in breach of the provision of the Constitution to protect the public from avarice and greed by members of Parliament who intertwine their business interests with their political position. So the Day case was a breakthrough, and now the Labor Party has taken a case against the member for Lyne, who replaced Oakeshott in New South Wales. I think he owned a shopping centre. His family company owned a shopping centre in which there was an Australia Post Office, or a sub-branch, a franchise of the Australia Post, in renting from his company. So is this a breach? Is this it's a contentious issue because it's a bit more remote. It's not actually Australia Post, it's a franchise of Australia Post. Very difficult to know whether there could be some overlap there. But then, my depressing sort of thoughts are, have we had enough talking? No. All right. No.
Needs some more from you because the fee we're paying you is so enormous.
I see the other sort of distressing thing is the way this rise of the right in all sorts of manifestations. It's not just, there's ideology. I mean, coal and, renewable energy has just become a completely ideological issue. It's got nothing to do with science at all. It's just ideology. Abbott and Turnbull, it's ideology. It's got nothing to do with good government or anything like that. Refugees, I think that's just become an ideology. You can automatically work out where someone sits on all sorts of, a range of a whole lot of issues if you know where they sit on refugees. They would almost, if they're against refugees, they'd almost be certainly against, marriage equality, climate change. They've been in favour of winding back human rights. It all slots into a sort of sequence. But one of the sort of extraordinary things that really took off under this government, when Abbott got in, was that all the money, the grants to community legal centres and other bodies was made conditional that they didn't do any advocacy, or that they didn't advocate on policy issues. So they wouldn't get funding for advocacy on policy issues. They'd get funding for helping people that were, in need of help with community legal centres. But then it sort of morphed into not getting money for cases that might change policy. And there was a very famous case a few years ago called Mrs. McNamara, lived in a property that was owned by the railways, I think it was. Anyway, they said, you've got to go, we want the property back. And the railway said, well, we're the Crown, we can do what we like. And Marrickville Legal Centre took it up and fought it. All the High Court authority had been that if you're the Crown, you're exempt from all these requirements for fairness and the Tenancy Act and all these sort of things that don't apply. But the Marrickville Legal Centre and a whole team of worthy barristers took it up to the High Court, and it was found that the Transit Authority or the Railway Authority was just an agent of the Crown. It wasn't actually the Crown's, so therefore she could stay in this tenancy. She's still there, I think. Yay! But it's just appalling, I think, that, all the money is made conditional on you behaving yourself, if you're a good little person for the Commonwealth government, you'll get funding. The new attack now is on environmental groups whose donations are largely tax deductible, and there's some nasty National Party character who's now wanting to knock off the tax deductibility of donations to environmental groups, particularly in environmental groups that are advocating against coal. So it just seems this drip, 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 this nastiness that goes on, this pettiness, based on a sort of ghastly ideological position, regressive. It's not actually helping anyone, but it's just a regressive view of the world, a corporatist view, should be, challenged constantly. And it just sort of, even though Sky News only has 13,000 viewers or something, these people are bashing away there night after night. And I think it's like water on a stone. It just sort of keeps wearing it away. So where are we now? My other beef is open justice, where we're seeing more and more what they call suppression and no publication orders coming from the courts. They come out every day now. Hatzistikos got this legislation passed called the No Publication and Suppression Orders Act. So the courts could just dish out these orders whenever one of the council asked for a suppression order. So a lot of cases we're just not reading about. And the courts were used to be a very big component of daily journalism. And it's becoming less so because cases, for the Brothers for Life case was largely never reported because, in that case there were back-to-back trials, and so they just suppressed any reporting of the Kwame brothers case, which is a very big case. It went on for a long time, and very violent individuals were eventually found guilty. But it's this sort of clash of the jury system with social media and the right to know, and the courts retreat. They just think, oh no, the jury system's so delicate and precious, we can't expose it to what's going on in social media or the news media. But the trouble is they make these suppression orders, which are voluminous. A lot of the Abid stuff was suppressed because there were multiple prospects of multiple trials, or cases were delayed because he was on new charges. I just think for the courts to sort of close themselves off like this is a very, very dangerous thing. Justice should be open. The old saying was that you should be able to see the judge himself should be judged by the public. Okay, I think that's about enough from me. If anyone would like to ask a question.